great to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
You're kind of wrapping up your career at Medill. How long have you been teaching there?
27 years.
Wow. And I just want to thank you again for getting me in teaching there, because it was a real treat to teach there because of you. Thank you so much. We taught.
I got some real attitudes about higher education, but we can talk about that.
Oh, yeah, no, that's great. But I mean, I tell you, some of my best moments teaching or in my professional career were at Medill with you.
Well,
So
those
thank
are
you.
some of my best moments too.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was just really scintillating, and the students were sharp, and
They are the only reason I have been there that long.
really.
Yes, that is the only reason I've been there that long. I make a distinction between when someone asks me, what do you do for a living? I don't know if you've noticed this. I never say I'm a professor. I always say I'm a teacher. And the reason for that is because I really think there's a distinction between a professor and a teacher. And if someone presses a little bit more, oh, well, where do you teach? Do you teach high school? Do you teach grade school? It's like, no, I teach at a university. Oh, well, then you're a professor. And then, okay, we can get into that if you want. But I have a real issue with the way higher education is conducted, particularly at research universities like Northwestern. And the difference between a professor and a teacher is professors concentrate more on what they're doing outside the classroom.
Right.
Research,
Yeah, you mentioned this.
publishing, bringing in grants, because they're encouraged to,
Right.
by
of
the
course.
university.
Yeah.
Teachers concentrate on what's being done inside the classroom.
Right.
And that's what I've always thought of myself as. I mean, I was hired at Medill to teach journalism.
Right.
And as far as I was concerned, as far as I've always been concerned, my job is to help young people get their careers in journalism started. It wasn't about me. It was about them.
Right.
And I'm not being altruistic. It's just practical.
I've gotten so much great feedback from the students that I taught with you about your teaching and the kind of impact that you've had. I mean, some of your students have gone on to work at the most prestigious media outlets in
I
the
saw
nation.
3
right?
of them on NBC Network News last night.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And what other outlets have your students been on that come to mind?
Well, there's Laura Bradley, who's with Vanity Fair.
Okay.
Andrew de Grand Prix, who's with the Washington Post. There's
Okay.
several other people there at the Washington Post. Alice Lee, for instance. NBC Network News. Jesse Kirsch, who is actually still a very good friend of mine. Sam Brock, who's with NBC. Julia Ainsley, who's with NBC. Natasha Alfred, whom I'm still in touch with, who's with CNN. Roxana Sabiri with CBS.
And
Medill students do very well.
Yeah.
In fact, if I have any regrets at all as a journalist, I should have gone to Medill.
Well, I remember helping to teach one of the classes in a series on methods, and that's one of the most important things that journalists can learn about, which is the methodology of doing good journalism in terms of corroborating your evidence, verifying your sources, etc., and things of that nature. And we don't see a whole lot of that in a lot of outlets because, with social media, everybody can publish their content. You know what I mean?
Well, that's kind of where an expression that I'm known for now came from, which is if you can't write, you ain't shit. Because the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people out there who are calling themselves journalists who are not.
Yeah, exactly. That term is thrown around way too loosely.
Much too loosely. And to be a journalist, you have to know the laws and the ethics.
Exactly.
We don't take an examination like a lawyer or an accountant or a physician. The only thing that certifies you as a journalist is how well you do your job.
Right.
And that all starts with this thing called veracity. Can you be believed? Because the information that you're reporting has been vetted. It's correct. Now, today, when people want news on their cell phones within minutes, it's much more difficult to verify information before it's reported, which is why you'll often hear, especially in the media, this has been unverified by NBC, but they're reporting it anyway. Actually, they shouldn't. But if they don't, someone else will and scoop them. Okay?
Right.
If you go back to, let's say, the assassination of JFK, John F. Kennedy, they didn't actually report that he was dead until he was. Okay? But today, what you're going to hear is an up-to-minute account until he actually dies. And some outlets might actually be reporting he is dead or some outlets might be reporting he's been shot, or some outlets might be reporting we're not sure. So the public gets confused.
Well, I just wanted to run this by you because, like, my belief and what I was, I went to journalism school, the graduate program at Columbia College, which, I had a really good experience there. And what they taught, which I, I feel is correct, is there is no pure objectivity. We all bring something as human beings.
That is
we all
absolutely
bring
true.
some sort of a natural bias. So if you don't have a paradigm of methodologies to like work against your own biases, then you're subject to your own human frailties. You know what I mean? Would you
I know exactly
agree with
what
that?
you mean. Yeah, I would agree with it 1,000%.
Because, like, I'm going to bring my own perspective to anything that I look at. Everything's a manipulation, if you think about it. In filmmaking, whether you do a documentary or dramatic film, whatever, and how you pose a question, how you don't. But you have to have some sort of a structure to go by so that your perspective isn't running the show on the way you report a story. And it's really, really important to do that. So, like, when people talk about true objectivity, I kind of like giggle to myself because, like, there's really no such thing. But, it's like, you can, I hate to use this phrase from Fox News, but you can try to be as fair and balanced as you can, even though they misuse that terminology, obviously.
Grossly.
But you can try to be as fair and balanced. And I always try to like think about my own biases that I'm bringing to a situation, try not to be run by that. Do you know what I mean?
What you're supposed to try to do is to keep your bias out of what you're reporting. Mm-hmm. If you have an opinion, well, then that's when you write an editorial. And
exactly.
right
that's what I'm
express
saying.
your
And like
editorial.
and put it forth as an opinion piece.
As an opinion piece.
And try not to disguise it as a news piece.
A news piece,
And we
exactly.
see that confusion all the time in
Yeah.
terms of opinion pieces seeping in the media landscape.
And what we
as
have now,
news.
which we didn't have before, are media outlets, and I will include MSNBC and CNN in this as well,
Sure.
that are almost all opinion. Well, CNN does do general reporting. MSNBC will do it as well when something breaks. But, for instance, I love Rachel Maddow. Okay?
Yeah.
Not just because I agree with her politically, but because she actually does have an excellent research staff. And what she does is a lot of myth busting. Fox News will report something and she will tell you, no, this is not true. This is actually what happened. Okay. But at the same time, yes, she's opinionated.
For sure. And also, God, when I ramping up to the election, the last presidential election, and the way in which Joy Reid spoke about Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
I was, my jaw was on the floor. I was mortified. And, what I realized is like, okay, it's a false equivalency to, between MSNBC and Fox. I get that. That's kind of a ridiculous comparison.
But one thing, you wouldn't have an MSNBC or you wouldn't need an MSNBC if you didn't have Fox.
Exactly. So a lot of it is like they're going back and forth to each other. However, you do realize that even though, there is some journalism done on some outlets, then all of a sudden some influence is seeping in. Democratic National Committee is saying, do not highlight this guy or that person, and we're going to crown this person. And you realize there's a power structure behind the scenes that if you're not tapped in, seems like, you don't notice it, but if you are, it's obvious.
We're all being controlled by a power structure.
Exactly.
I wish it weren't that way. We're supposed to be a democracy. But the fact of the matter is that we're all being controlled. And our thought process or processes are being controlled by a power structure.
Totally.
And it just depends on what power structure you more or less adhere to or lean toward. I'll tell anybody who asks, even if you don't ask, I'm a leftist. Okay. Somebody recently described me as a communist. I'm not a communist. But what I am is a social democrat. And you could say that I do lean towards socialism. I'm about as far away from the right as you can get. And the thing that's so interesting about it is that people often get more conservative as they get older. I seem to become a little bit more radical.
Well, you know what? What's interesting, I wanted to ask you about that because, like, as I've gotten older, and I hear what you're saying, like the general way people get as they get older, they get more set in their ways, and they come from a place of scarcity as opposed to abundance, and they get more conservative as a result. And I can see that. I haven't done that like you. I've actually, like, a lot of my ideals that I've grown up with have been confirmed. But what I have noticed is that the way in which we identify and labels stops a lot of productive conversation.
It does.
And it really pains me to see that. So, for instance, like, the general conservative mindset, even though, under Reagan, he wasn't fiscally conservative, just like to be responsible fiscally, even though they haven't preached they haven't done, practiced what they preached, particularly in the Reagan administration on the conservative end. But, like, am I for efficient use of financial resources? Absolutely.
Well,
like, who wouldn't be?
Who wouldn't be?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So, I see that there's a lot of ginned up controversy in our media, and people are yelling at each other. And part of what I want to do with the incentives series that we'll be doing for this podcast is actually having people. It's fine if you want to have thoughtful disagreements, but let's get our perspective on the table that's not through the paradigm of I'm this and you're that, and so that we can't ever agree. Actually, what I found is that if you can get that out of the way, get the labels and the identities out of the way, and have people really having thoughtful conversations in a paradigm that's respectful, what I find is that oftentimes there's way more common ground than people realize, which is so refreshing, but we don't get a chance to experience that because the incentive structures, and please speak to this if you like, in the media actually people make money the more ginned up controversy there is.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. Yeah, you make money through the controversy. Look, why is there so much coverage of someone like Donald Trump? Why did he get so much coverage in 2016? Because he's clickbait.
Totally.
Okay? And people tune in to see, what did he say today? What did he do today? Okay?
And it's all so outrageous.
Yeah, it is. And he, I think to an extent, well, to a very great extent, has learned how to manipulate that.
Oh,
the
my
more
God.
outrageous I am, the more audience he's a TV personality. And that's pretty much all he is. But, he's a TV personality, so he knows how to do that. And they're playing each other. That town hall in May, he played those networks, man. He played that network. He did. That was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. In the first place, who was the moderator? Caitlin Collins. She's a pretty good journalist.
Okay.
And I will give her credit for doing some on-the-spot myth busting. When he would say something and she would say, "That's not true, Mr. Trump." But here's the thing. First of all, it was mostly his supporters, or at least largely his supporters in the audience. And I didn't find this out until later, but I did notice that they didn't film the audience often. What they did is they kept the camera on Trump and Caitlin Collins, because if you'd actually turned the camera to the audience, you'd have seen that not everybody was cheering and applauding. Okay? There were some people there who were looking pained, introspective, disgusted.
Right.
But they didn't want you to see that. What they wanted was all this cheering and supporting. So basically what it was an infomercial for Donald Trump. He got to lie and bullshit people. And, he every time he did or insulted somebody, the audience cheered, they clapped, they just went nuts. So you're seeing this. And what I'm asking myself is, why are they doing this? Well, they did it because Donald Trump insisted on it, probably. He probably told them, if you don't have my people in the audience, you're not going to get me. The man is essentially a coward, so he's not going to go and be questioned in front of an objective audience that might boo him.
Right.
Or people who might ask him some really hard questions that he cannot answer, okay, or looks like an idiot when he does answer them. So they got the audience that is going to gin him up and support him. And why did they do that? Because they wanted him on the air. And why did they want him on the air? Once again, because they knew it was going to bring in a large share of the audience, which it did. Not as large as they thought it would, because a lot of people just said, I'm not going to, I don't want to hear what this guy has to say.
Right.
The only reason I watched it is because I'm a journalist.
Right.
And I wanted to see how this was going to go off. But it was a clown show.
Well, that's what I mean. As you're talking, I'm thinking, there was a certain amount of, I always felt a certain amount of responsibility to keep up to date with, just current affairs, et cetera, et cetera. But man, after he became president, and then especially when he, left office, I just couldn't stomach listening anymore. It was just it seemed just a circus, and I had to protect my spirit, to be honest with you.
It's still a circus. I mean, you consider that where we are right now. This is a man that peaceful transfer of power. Now, as an African American, I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh, the United States is this wonderful country that's always been so fair." There've always been issues, but there are certain things that I could be, if not proud of, at least I could admit were true. Mm-hmm. And one was that tradition of a peaceful transfer of power.
Yes. Yeah,
Democrat or Republican, if you lost, you conceded to the next person.
Absolutely.
He lost.
Yeah.
He refused to concede. Totally. It's that simple. It's like you run a race, you lose it, and you refuse to accept the fact that you lost it. All right? And then beyond that, what he did was he encouraged a bunch of people to storm the Capitol. That is nothing less than a traitorous move.
I know, and now he's
running for president.
It's just turns everything like that I kind of held somewhat dear about this country kind of on its head.
It's lopsided.
It's totally.
So why is a man who, how many indictments has he had now? 5, 6? Who has been, we now can say, is a known sexual predator, okay? I personally believe is an African American, is a racist to his core, all right? And this man is running for president?
Yeah.
It's just, understand that what killed George Bush's presidency was Iraq, okay? Mm-hmm. And also his lackadaisical response to Hurricane Katrina.
Totally.
And I kind of wish we could, I look back at those days and I think, do you remember Steve King, I think he was a congressman from Iowa? The Republican Party got rid of him the moment he made 1 or 2 racist comments. And look where we are today.
Oh, I know. That's what's amazing about Trump is that he has altered the landscape in terms of what can pass through. I mean, any one of his comments leading up to when he actually beat Hillary Clinton would have disqualified any other candidate.
Yeah.
I mean, the secret audio that he got on the bus, that they got on the bus about grabbing women's private parts.
Yes.
I mean, it's like that would have disqualified anybody. But he created a new paradigm completely. It was like wild to think about. And he's sharp in a specific way and very, not so sharp in a lot of other ways.
Very
all the ones that really matter to me, unfortunately. But yeah, he did create a new paradigm in that way, which is like insane. And now it's actually brought to light the the absurdity of our media landscape, because actually they seem to feed off someone like him.
They do feed off,
and they prop him up. And so it's this horrible cycle where the media, he feeds the media landscape, and then they feed him by giving him all this free airtime.
That's exactly it. The media are they're feeding off of each other.
Yeah, and it's really, and who's getting hurt is us, the country. I mean, it's a horrible paradigm that I want to be a part of breaking that. I want more independent journalism to flourish in this country, where there's actually enriching reporting that's not coming through a certain set of influence, and really talking about issues that we need to dissect and learn more about. You know what I mean? Like climate change, like our justice system, like healthcare. You know what I'm saying?
It's all becoming sublimated to this horrible political landscape that we have right now. And it's continuing. Did
you read a little bit? I don't know if you're read up on Cornel West recently wrote about political apartheid and the two-party system and how it just doesn't allow for more opinions to come in. Right. And I've always thought about it. And so, like, every year, if you go for, say, a Ralph Nader, a third-party candidate runs, where, a lot of the things he says seem to be good. But if you do that, if you vote for a third-party candidate, it's taking away from the Democratic candidate. And then if you adhere to some of those ideals, even though you may not like the candidate that much, then all of a sudden it's like, well, do you want the Republican? And is that good or not? Or, and then all of a sudden you realize very quickly that we don't have a whole lot of choice.
We have two choices. That's it.
That's it. It's ridiculous.
We have two choices. And, what you just said is true, that if you vote third party, which people do, all you're doing is removing the opportunity or lessening the opportunity for one particular candidate to win,
right.
Which is why, I just, either we're going to seriously diversify our political options, or we're going to accept the fact that we do have just two choices. And of course, that's why a lot of people were upset with Bernie Sanders, because they thought that he was siphoning off votes that could have gone to Hillary Clinton.
Same paradigm always.
Exactly. And, as a result of, there were a lot of things that came into play
Sure.
when Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016. I want to make it clear, though, however, that in both elections, 2016 and 2020, he did not win the popular vote.
I know. And that's another thing.
What he won in 2016 was the Electoral College, and there is an issue there, there, because the Electoral College needs, in my opinion, needs to be gone. Okay?
Totally. I mean,
they need to exit.
That's it's an undemocratic process. No. And same with the Senate. That's not a democratic institution, because it's like you get 2 senators for every state, no matter how big or small you are.
Exactly.
So it's like if you get rid of the Senate and you get rid of the Electoral College, all of a sudden you're like, because you realize actually majority of the majority of people in this country, their will on specific issues and what they want on specific issues generally is not put into law and practice. So the will of the people is generally not being done by our current legislature.
No, it is not. And we can see that. I mean, look at what's going on right now. Is the Supreme Court adhering to the will of the people? No. At this point, not at all. I mean, it's been shown time and time again that some 80% of Americans support some form of abortion. The Supreme Court just struck it. Well, they basically turned it back to the states. And, states' rights. Come on, if they ever go back to the point of states' rights, well, then we can get back to the point of, if I take a bus past the Mason-Dixon line, I'm going to have to move to the back of it, because that's what we're going to do. Affirmative action has just been struck down. Oh, well, we've reached racial parity. The hell we have.
I mean, if you want to talk about racial parity, I mean, I would just lead people to, the 1619 Project and critical race theory that came, the 1619
Which you
Project
cannot even teach in Florida.
Oh, I know. And the 1619 Project was put forth in 2019. But critical race theory, what a lot of people probably don't know is that that's been around since the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And just talking about structural and systemic racism that is institutionalized and has, is pervasive in our society in terms of real estate, in terms of dividing lines in cities.
Let me tell you a story.
Please.
Which,
oh, wait, we don't have time. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
You lied to me. Which I think, the whole thing about critical race theory, or teaching the truth about America's racist past and present, but particularly, let's say, slavery, which is being passed off in some circles as a management dispute or something. I worked on a project about 10 years ago where Medill students joined with 10 German students from the University of Hamburg. We did a Holocaust perspective. I've mentioned this, the memory archives.
Yeah, the memory archives.
We're interviewing not only the few and very elderly survivors of the Holocaust, but often their children and grandchildren, of deceased Holocaust survivors, to show that the effect continues through generations.
Trauma's passed down.
The trauma's passed down.
Yeah,
exactly. Even after the person who went through it is deceased. Well, there was one student, I've forgotten her name, but she and the Medill student interviewed an elderly Holocaust survivor who was very gracious, very generous. And after the interview, they were very professional. This student broke down into tears.
Oh, really?
Just cried. The German student cried and cried and cried. Found out that the reason she was crying is because her grandfather, a man that she loved, had been SS.
Oh, my. He was in the SS?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So she had to accept the fact that her grandfather, and she knew this, but her grandfather was involved in the extermination of people like this lovely woman that she just
Well,
spoke
I mean,
to.
I mean, she may have known it conceptually, but it probably hit home.
This put it right in front of her face.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yes, that was hard to deal with.
Yes.
Of course that was traumatic. It was horrible. But she dealt with it.
Right. And
That's the point.
That's what we're not doing in this country
that's
with
what we're
regards
not
to
doing
slavery.
now. Yeah, you know what? It's going to hurt you. It might make you sad. It might traumatize you. But you think it's traumatizing you? What do you think it did to my ancestors? Okay?
Exactly.
So face it. Deal with it.
Yes.
Be brave. Don't be, they talk about how so-called liberals are snowflakes. Are you kidding me? That's the biggest snowflake thing I can think of. That's a blizzard. Okay, I can't face the past that my great grandfather might have been a slave owner. That's going to traumatize me. I mean, come on.
The intellectual gymnastics is so absurd to me. Where people think, well, parents of students say, well, I don't want my kid to think that they're racist, their white children are racist or what have you, which is obviously not the point. The point, really, from my perspective, is that things like critical race theory and the 1619 project are simply an attempt for probably the first time to really talk about the history of this country in an honest way.
Yeah.
Particularly about the black experience.
Yeah.
And how integral that was, and how this country was built on the backs of black people that were kidnapped from Africa.
And because we can't deal with that, we can't get past it.
That's what I'm saying. Like that's the thing that's hugely missing in Germany. You deny the Holocaust, you go to jail. Yeah. There are memorials all around Germany. There's an open societal acknowledgement of what happened.
Yeah.
We need that here.
They're facing it.
And so of course people are going to go batshit crazy when you, for the first time, acknowledge something that is clearly the elephant in the room, and people are just like, oh my God, I can't do that. I can't teach that. This can't be possibly taught about, because it's going to upend the way we do business, the way we function as a society. And what people who deny that don't realize is there's so much possibility on the other end of that. And so, if you just look at anybody who denies that this is happening, just look at the wealth gap.
Yes.
Between black people and everybody else in this country. Look at the wealth accumulation gap, and it's still largely unchanged from decades ago.
Yeah.
What's going on with that? Blacks were not included in the GI Bill. They were redlined with real estate, buying real estate and homes, and it goes on and on.
And so as a result of that, we don't have wealth to pass on to the next generation.
Exactly. So that lacks power.
We don't know about stocks and bonds, and because the whole issue for so many black families wasn't about stocks and bonds. It was about putting food on the table.
Exactly.
And staying employed, if you could possibly manage that.
Yeah.
So there's just, if I were Secretary of Education,
okay,
there are probably a lot of people out there who would be glad that I'm not after I say this, there would be certain books, are you kidding, being banned? They would be on the reading list. But I would also pass a law or decree that every junior high school and high school would be required to show their student classes 2 movies, Schindler's List and 12 Years a Slave. Okay? Because those are 2 of the most brutally honest movies I have ever seen about putting forth something that we need to face.
Yeah, for
okay?
sure.
There was a Holocaust. People died. People suffered. Okay? There was slavery in this country. For African Americans, this was our Holocaust.
Oh, totally.
People died. People suffered. Those 2 movies are difficult to sit through.
Oh,
they are extremely hard to sit through.
And I sat through both of them.
I did too. And once you do that, you see that. I mean, the scene in 12 Years a Slave where, the girl is beaten at the end. I can't even watch that.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Okay.
yeah,
But
it's
it
intense.
needs to be there.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Schindler's List, when
Don't
the
sugarcoat
girl is the architect is telling him you're doing this the wrong way, and the guy says shoot her, and they shoot her, and then they say do it the way she said. People need to
Exactly.
see that.
Yes.
And this whole thing of I want to protect you from the truth, protecting you from the truth is not going to help you. It's only perpetuating a lie. What happens if you raise your kid? I always use this parable. You raise your kid in this little, protected bubble where you won't have to deal with anybody that doesn't look like you or doesn't think the way you do or doesn't come from the same community that you are. That's fine if you're going to stay there. What is Jason Aldean's, try that in a small town. But if you want to stay in that little small town, you'll be fine. But let's say, you're the smart one in your family and you get accepted to a prestigious university, maybe Northwestern. And you're the first one in your family to go off to college. Isn't this wonderful? And then you go off to Northwestern, you walk into a classroom, and the first person you see is me. What does that do to your head? Because they've just told you, black people are trash, but this person is my professor.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Or you graduate and you go off, and your first job. And your first person you see is someone like me. Or maybe someone who's Asian or East Indian or Hispanic or a woman. Okay? And you've been told to think a certain way about these people, and now this person has a definite impact on how much progress you're going to make. How does that mess with your head? Okay?
Exactly.
Or you leave this country, God, if you're lucky, and you go someplace else, and you end up in a place in Africa, okay, or Asia or Southeast Asia, and you're around people who don't look like you, who don't, come from your background. How does that mess with your head? If you raise your kid, and I'm saying this for everybody across the board, all right?
Right.
If you raise your kid to only accept one kind of people, you're crippling that kid for life.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That's what you're doing.
Traveling is one of the ways to combat against all this. And what was really
It's the best
inspiring
education you can give yourself.
Oh, totally. And a couple of students of yours, one of whom I've spent time with, and I want to touch on the other one, is Jack Bridges, who, you and I worked on a wonderful project together called Inside Robert Taylor. Jack Bridges, a young former white student of yours. He's still white, but he was a former student. But he went into, I asked you about this. He took these incredible pictures inside the Robert Taylor projects before they were torn down.
Yeah.
And he got unprecedented access.
Yeah, he did.
Once
he got the trust of the people there.
And I asked you, I said, was he from a big city? And you're like, no, he was just kind of I think he was from Rhode Island or something.
He's from
out east.
Michigan, Ann Arbor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he wasn't brought up in the streets. I mean, he wasn't brought up around.
His father was a stockbroker.
Yeah, exactly. He was probably lived in a well-to-do neighborhood.
Very much so.
But somehow he was able
went to Bucknell before he went to Medill.
Where?
Bucknell University.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And he was able to get unprecedented access because he embodied what, I would imagine you and I are probably on the same page about in terms of what a really good journalist should be, is that he was respectful.
He was very respectful. And I mean, when we would go to Taylor with him, he was like a rock star. I mean, Jack is here. And these are people who, don't trust white folks.
Exactly.
But they loved him.
Exactly.
I'll give you an example. One day I was with him, and Jack would often take Polaroids. I don't know if younger people know what those are, but those were instant photographs. You take a picture. Is, Madeline? Instant pictures. And he would take Polaroids before he actually took his actual photos to see how they were going to look.
Right.
And one day I was with him at Taylor, and he was taking Polaroids, and people would come up to him and, Jack, take my picture. Jack, take my picture.
Right.
He must have burned up because Polaroid film was expensive. So he must have burned up about $200 in Polaroid film that day, just taking people's pictures because they asked him.
Right.
And I asked him why he did that, and he said, well, a lot of these people have never had a picture taken of themselves. And you could see it because he'd give them the picture and they'd be walking away looking at the picture with a smile on their face. You know, I think at one point, if I'm not mistaken, he took somebody's kid to the hospital.
It does not surprise me.
You know, he just, first of all,
does not surprise me at all.
He's a very kind and generous person.
Gentle, too. Gentle, beautiful
Exactly.
spirit.
And that came out when he was talking to people, that this wasn't just for him. That he was actually, when we finished the project, he wanted to go by and thank people who had given him his time. He had little poinsettias. This was near Christmas. And the reason for that is because he said he noticed two things whenever he would go to these people's apartments, that the two things that were missing. They didn't have books and they didn't have plants.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, it's just that kind of sensitivity and awareness. He didn't just come in. You know, here's a contrast. A couple of years later, there were a couple of students at Medill, white students, young ladies, who wanted to go by Cabrini Green when Cabrini Green was still standing. And they wanted to do some interviews. And they came to me because they knew about the Robert Taylor Project. Well, Steve, we wanted to come to you and ask you, you know, how we should do this. We were thinking about going with a police officer. I said, that is the worst thing you could possibly do. This is absolutely the worst thing you could possibly do. I've come here to interview you, for you to share some details of your life. By the way, this police officer is here to protect me from you. Okay? Well, you know, how do we do it? I said, you take your chances. You let these people know you're coming, and then you go in and you talk to them the way you would talk to anyone else you respected. Exactly. And that's what they did.
Exactly.
And that's what Jack did.
Yeah.
He didn't need a police officer.
Yeah.
You know, he went there on his own. He took his chances. Yes, he could have had his ass kicked, a lot of other things, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen because of the way that he approached this project and the way he approached the people who live there.
Exactly. I mean, it's everything.
Unenduring respect, everlasting respect for them.
Oh, I remember when you showed me, and by the way, Inside Robert Taylor is, for our audience, is an exceptional portrait of people through photography, exceptional, mainly still photography.
You can find it simply by Googling Inside Robert Taylor.
It's on our
YouTube.
Rhythm and Light YouTube channel. Exactly. We have it up there, and we'll put a link.
You watch it.
Yes, and it's beautiful. And Mr. Garnett here wrote it and narrated it.
Imagine a pleasant conversation with a middle-aged woman in her kitchen. She is stout, with deep umber skin. She is sitting on a worn-out sofa as the fine aroma of what she's cooking travels through the room. There is about her an easy informality as she speaks about the simple details of her life, day to day. Her speech still has the soft cadence of the South, where she once dreamed of living in a new house in a large and prosperous northern city. Half that dream has come true. She lives in Chicago, but her home is in Robert Taylor, a place known for robbing people of their dreams.
And it's really wonderful.
Steve Ordower put it all together.
Yeah, and I was honored and privileged.
And we lost one team member recently, Greg.
Oh, yes. Greg Jackson did the video. So there is some video. May he rest in peace, Greg Jackson, who both of us have worked with many times on many different occasions in a variety of ways. And yeah, I mean, when I saw the photography, I mean, he shot film, large format and regular 35 millimeter film.
Yeah.
It was just absolutely stunning. And it took my breath away. I said, yeah, of course I'd like to be involved in this. And now I believe Medill shows it to incoming freshmen, this project.
They do. I don't know if they still do, but for a long time, yes, they did.
Yeah.
Including, that's how I met Jesse Kirsch, because they showed it to the audience, the entire freshman class. And then they had me come up and answer questions. And Jesse was one of the first people to ask a question. And I said, oh, this kid is sharp. You know? So when I did the project in Hamburg, there were 7 graduate students and 3 undergrads. And Jesse was one of the undergrads. He was the youngest person on that project. He just finished his freshman year. 19-year-old.
Okay.
And now he's a correspondent for NBC. You know?
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
But yeah, he saw it, as did the whole freshman class. And I don't know if the graduate students have seen it too. You know, and the reason that project was shown was for a variety of reasons, but one of them was two reasons. One was to let them know what journalists have to do in order to get a true story.
Exactly.
You have to go to the source. You do not believe what anybody tells you. You believe what you see.
Because there's so much in our society where people are responding to what other people said a certain subject said, as opposed to, well, did you listen to it from their mouth?
Yeah.
No matter who it is, how controversial.
Yeah.
Whether it be Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Louis Farrakhan, I don't care who it is. Did you listen to it come out of their mouth?
And did you go to the scene? Did you see it yourself?
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. Are you listening to it from them in context?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because, of course, Jack knew Robert Taylor was dangerous.
Of course.
But that didn't stop him from going.
I know. And, you know, there's another student that I have an incredible amount of respect for that, unfortunately, I did not get to meet. That's no longer with us. But I was on the Medill campus teaching at Northwestern, and all of a sudden these bells started ringing. And I was like, you know.
You're talking about Jim.
James Foley.
Yeah.
And, I mean, even just saying his name gets me. And I didn't even know the guy. I get emotional about it.
I do get emotional.
Could you talk a little bit about him and his courage?
What can I say about James Foley? He was one of the most real people I've ever known in my life. And he believed very strongly in going where the story was. Now, I have a personal opinion about Jim. I don't think he was murdered, and I do say murdered, and I always hate to say this expression that, you know, he was executed. They didn't have any right to execute anybody. They weren't a sovereign state, ISIS. There was no trial. They murdered him. Okay?
On video, just for our audience member, unfortunately, this courageous young man was beheaded.
Yes.
It was horrifying.
It was horrifying. I've never seen that video, by the way. And
Me neither.
Will.
I don't want to see it.
I don't want to see it.
There's a documentary on HBO about him,
I think he might have been targeted because he was a war correspondent. But Jim would go beyond that and actually talk to people and show what was happening to people who were being affected by this war. And in so doing, he'd have to be very honest about what damage was being done to people and by whom. So what happened is that I've heard that he was actually at first captured by Syrian forces,
right,
who sold him to terrorists. And he went through hell, absolute hell, in the year and a half that he was held before he was murdered.
Oh, wow. Well, there was another time where he was actually kidnapped. I don't know if it was
in Libya.
In Libya, and then he actually made it back, and then he went back.
He went back to work. He came to Medill, and they had a session with him in the forum, which is a place where students gather. And, you know, he was very gracious and honest about answering questions. These students, the Libyans held him, I've forgotten how long now. This either several months, I think. And it was terrifying. You know, Jim was a Catholic and very religious.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Every time he sent me an email I used to tell him when he was a correspondent, because, you know, war correspondence is extremely dangerous. And I would tell him, would you please keep in touch? And I'd said, you know, even if it's just an email saying, "Hey, Steve, I'm still breathing. Please do that." Right. So every now and then he'd send me an email that said, "Hey, Steve, I'm still breathing." God bless you.
Very nice of him.
But it would end at "God bless you." But anyway, you know, he talked about how he got through those days, and it was pretty horrifying. It was really terrifying. Actually, one of the correspondents who was captured with him was killed. A Danish, I think, correspondent at that time. And then he was held by the Libyans for, I think, 3 months. It's getting a little foggy now because that was back in 2011, I think. He came to Medill in May of that year. I think it was 2011, and spoke about it very candidly to the students. And I saw him afterwards. and he had a desk job. Forgotten McClatchy. He had a desk job with the McClatchy News Service.
Okay.
And I asked him how he liked it. He said it's boring as hell.
Yeah.
I said, well, are you gonna, are you gonna stay here or whatnot? He said, well, I'm gonna visit with my family and some friends. I'm gonna go back to work, and that's what he did.
Right.
He went back and started covering the war in Iraq, and we know the end result of it. And I've had some very naive people ask me, well, God, why was he there? He was doing his job. Mm-hmm. I've always said, again, this is a personal opinion, that the two most important genres of journalism, investigative and war correspondence, and both can be very dangerous. Mm-hmm. Investigative because there's a difference between covering something and uncovering something.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You cover something that's happened. But investigative journalists go in there and find out why it happened. Mm-hmm. Okay?
And you can ruffle some feathers.
You can ruffle quite a few feathers.
People might want to
don't forget about Don Bowles, the investigative journalist who got in his car one morning in 1984 and it exploded. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's war correspondence. Mm-hmm. You need to know the progress of a conflict. Who's winning and who's losing. Because that conflict can catch up with you. Mm-hmm. So you need to know what's going on there. You need to know, and
why it's happening.
And why
like
it's
for
happening.
real. Oftentimes, what we're led to believe is just the surface information, and there's a whole nother story beneath the.
You need somebody who can get in depth with this and tell you why something is happening and where it is progressing. Okay,
absolutely.
And I've always said, I'm for the first investigative reporting. I'll do that. I ain't doing no war correspondence. It takes a certain kind of person to do that, and I admit I don't have the guts for that.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, that's the thing that struck me about his story, James Foley's story, is just the incredible amount of courage that he had. And how old was he?
When he died, he was 40, young man.
Yeah.
When he started, I think he might have been he was in my class, he was in his early 30s. So I think by the time he started, when he became a war correspondent, he was probably about 35.
Okay.
And if you see the video, the videos that he would send, oh my God, he had on his helmet and his flak jacket.
Yeah, I've seen pictures
and they would
of him.
literally you could hear the bullets whizzing past his head. He was in the thick of it.
I don't understand. I don't understand how you willingly go to that situation.
You have to.
He has a
he
calling.
admitted he was an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah.
He admitted that.
Right.
And you have to be. You can't be a cautious person and do that kind of work. It's just it ain't gonna work. You have to be someone who's willing to take tremendous risk. And I guess you either have to accept the fact that you could die.
Totally.
Or you have to go the opposite direction and just convince yourself that you won't. I don't know how else you do it.
I wonder if he got more religious as he was.
I wonder that too. If he'd lived, I'd have asked him that. I wonder that too. I really do. If he'd lived. He was, I've taught a lot of people at Medill, thousands, I'm sure. But some of them I get kind of close to.
How can you not?
As I've said, that has been the most pleasant part of the experience and the only reason I'm still there. And I've been there all these years. It's, I talked about the difference between being a professor and a teacher.
Right.
I am a professor on paper.
Right.
But what I've always been is a teacher.
Totally.
My mother was a teacher, and she was a damn good one. And I asked her once, what's your secret? What is it that, why is it that you have people coming by your house who are now doctors, lawyers, police officers, nurses, teachers themselves, who still remember what Mrs. Garnett taught them in the 4th grade? And she said, it's just a simple rule. Teach them well and respect them. And I've never forgotten that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
So that's what I do.
Totally.
That's what's kept me there.
Yeah.
But of all the thousands of people I've taught, there are really only a few that I've gotten really very close to. Some that I might have taught 5, 10, 12, 20 years ago. And I still hear from them. I still see them when they come through town. I just had lunch, just a couple of days ago with a young lady, Monique Beals, who was a former student of mine, a graduate student. You know, a couple of months before that, Marco Alday, who's now working for ProPublica. Early last month, Jesse Kirsch. You know, every time he comes through Chicago, he makes sure, you know, he gets in touch, you know.
That's
Spoke to
awesome.
Brian Watson, you know, someone I taught almost 20 years ago. He sends me a bottle of whiskey on my birthday every year, you know.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Michael Duffin, who works for the State Department. I could go on and on.
I bet you know.
You know, and name people. But the reason these friendships form is because at some point in time, there is a discussion outside the classroom where we click on certain issues.
Exactly.
And we develop this easy relationship that continues. And I get a chance to see what these people do when they leave. That is always the best thing for me, no matter who you are as a student.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
You know, what do you do with the education that you've gotten in Medill? And I get to see that.
Yeah, man.
And sometimes I actually get to be a personal witness to it when they keep in touch. And not only that, I get to see them get married and have kids.
Yep.
And, you know, it's just wonderful.
Yeah, I was at a wedding of a former student of mine, and then a bunch of other former students were there, and I was just like, "Oh, I'm
From
working,
Medill or
I'm-
Columbia?
Actually from the Illinois Institute of Art."
Okay. Yeah.
And you know, I'm working at the NFL. Oh, I'm working at HBO. Or I'm working at Vice, etc. You know, thanks for all you taught me, etc. I totally get that. I just didn't want to, you were talking about.
I want to mention Nia Arnold,
Okay.
who is a teacher herself now. That to me is so amazing. I mean,
Who is this?
Nia Arnold.
Okay. Where's she at?
She teaches at a public school in Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay.
And the thing about it is that, yeah, it's so wonderful when they become journalists, but probably the greatest thing is for a teacher to see another student become a teacher,
Yeah.
especially a great teacher.
Right.
You know, and I complimented her recently and told her, you know, because she's a great teacher. She's doing such a great job. You know, the kids love her. And I complimented her on that, you know, and I said, that is just so great to see that. And she said, that started with you. You know,
That's beautiful.
You taught me how to do this. And that is beautiful. You know, I mean, that can, it can almost wipe away all the crap I've had to go through.
Yeah, I know.
At NU, okay? We'll get on that in another subject, but I've made it clear that the reason I've been there all those years is because of the students.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there is no other reason.
Yeah, no. Well, you also, I mean, you were able to, I mean, I don't know if, how, much involved Northwestern or how helpful they were with some of the projects you were involved with, like the memory archives, but there was another one that you mentioned as something that was dear to you, which was Flight for Life.
Flight for Life.
Flight for Life. Forgive me.
Life.
Could you
Yes.
please talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit?
Oh my gosh. That was the second project I did with the University of Hamburg. The German director of the memory archives.
Okay.
Is Professor Stephan Burkhardt. We share the first name.
Oh, yeah. I think I met him once,
Yeah,
right?
you did.
Yeah, okay.
We call each other name brothers.
Right. Right.
Although his first name is spelled differently than
Yes,
mine, but it's
that I
pronounced
remember
the same
that.
way.
Okay.
He got in touch a year after we did the memory archives
Okay.
and said that they had some money to spend and he wanted to do a second project.
Okay.
And he said, do you have any ideas? And it just so turns out I did.
Right. Of course.
This was at the height of the Arab Spring when a lot of people had to leave their countries for their own safety and well-being, often with or without their families. And they were coming through Hamburg because Germany at that time was a lot more gracious about accepting, at least at that time, refugees. I said, you're in the perfect place for this. So we got together with Medill. It was 11 students from Medill. 10 of them went to Hamburg. One actually went to Jordan, to a refugee camp in Jordan, and did a 5-minute video on the medical and dental state of children in this refugee camp. The other 10 students joined with 12 students from the University of Hamburg and 10 other students who came over from St. Petersburg State University in Russia. 33 students divided into 10 teams of 3. and they each produced a story. More often a written story, but some of them were video stories, some of them were audio stories. For instance, there was one story that was done by one team in which they went into a refugee camp near Hamburg and did a 12-minute audio story, and they all three narrated it. Some of the most amazing work. Another team looked at the efforts to integrate the refugee children into the German school system. Another team did a video story of a refugee from Afghanistan who had been, who was actually coerced into selling drugs for the Taliban.
Oh, wow.
And when he refused to do so, they threatened to kill him. So he had to leave, and he was in Germany, and there was a risk that he might be sent back to Afghanistan because Germany at that time did not consider Afghanistan to be a war-torn country.
Wow.
And, if he went back, he would be murdered.
Wow.
And the whole time that they were interviewing him, he kept snapping this rubber band against his wrist. And the reason he did that is because he said every time he felt pain, he knew he was alive.
Oh, wow.
There's another story, an audio story of a young woman who left Afghanistan because the Taliban wanted to take her 12-year-old daughter and marry her off to a 48-year-old man.
Oh, my God.
After she'd been sexually mutilated.
Oh, my God.
These are the kind of stories that were coming out of there. From Afghanistan, from Syria, from Iraq, from Sudan. They interviewed people from about half a dozen different countries and produced these stories.
And you just don't see this.
No.
I mean, most of mainstream media consumers don't see this type
was at
of
the
story.
height. And also what was interesting is that they were working with Russian students, and we supposedly have this, this terrible relationship with Russia. But I'm telling you, these Russian students were very anxious to be a part of this project. Most of the writing was done by the Medill students because the stories were written in English. But the reason why we were able to do this story, all of these stories, to produce this project, and I want to make this clear, in 6 days, we got there, I think, on June 8th, and we left on the 14th, is because all the German students had set up all the interviews.
Wow.
By the time we got there, we could hit the ground running because they had already contacted people and set up interviews. Contacted refugees, contacted social workers.
What year was this?
2016.
2016.
Okay. So they were able to hit the ground running. They also translated because some of these interviews were done in German.
Oh, my gosh.
And there were two students. One was originally from Afghanistan and the other from Morocco. They spoke Farsi. Okay.
Incredible.
So if someone spoke German or Farsi, there were two students on that. There were students on the project who could translate. Okay. And then all of that information was taken back to St. Petersburg, Russia, and the Russian students built the website.
That's
so this
incredible.
was a thoroughly collaborative effort.
That is. And by the way, are they on the web? Are they on the internet somewhere? Or was it taken down?
I don't know. It was for a while. This breaks my heart.
It's called Flight for Life, right?
Used to be able to find it at flightforlife.com.
If it's anywhere on the internet, we'll put this in the show notes for sure.
Yeah,
for this
if we can
episode.
find it.
Yeah. I also wanted to touch on, before we get to incentive structures, but I did want to touch on, we talked about critical race theory. We talked about the 1619 Project. And, it's really hard for somebody who's not black to wrap their heads around what it is like to be black in this country. And you wrote, you're now freed up to express your opinions. Where do you post your opinion pieces online again?
Max News Today.
Max News Today. And in one of your articles, you wrote an article entitled
MaxNewsToday.com.
Okay, and it's called Driving Us Crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And it talked about, being pulled over as a black person versus a white person or any other color person. And I thought about that a lot, even though I've known about this for years growing up in Hyde Park and having my, Sid Ordower as my father. So that's a little different story. However, I remember countless times I've been pulled over by the police and never, ever been harassed except for one time. One time where I was pushed.
I had a cop put a loaded gun in my forehead on the night of my 21st birthday.
And what happened?
What happened is two friends of mine came out for the first legal drink. Mm-hmm. We went to a club that used to exist on McClurg Court called Tenement Square, discotheque,
Okay.
disco dancing.
Sounds fun.
It was,
Right.
And when we got there, we realized that I'd done something stupid, which is that I'd actually forgotten to bring my driver's license. So we were getting back into the car. There was a parking lot a couple of blocks away. This was obviously, on the near north side in a very exclusive neighborhood.
Right.
And we were getting back into the car to go back out to my house to get my driver's license. And within seconds, all of a sudden, it's like 3 or 4 police cars, well, 2 or 3 police cars just swooped into the lot. The next thing we know, there are this like half a dozen police officers, all white, screaming at us, "Get the fuck out of the car, get out of the car, get out of the car, get out of the car." They went around to the driver's side and they pulled my friend Al, literally reached in and pulled him out of the car. And then there was another cop that was trying to pull my friend Gordon out of the front seat. I was in the back seat. And we're saying, "Look, we can get out. We can get out." They lined us up behind the back of the car. And this is the thing about it. They're screaming at us. We don't know what's going on. We have no idea what this is about. But through the screaming and what we heard on the radio, it apparently came through that they were looking for 3 black guys who had robbed somebody and shot them.
Wow.
And we were saying, "We're not the ones you're looking for." And they, "Yes, you are. Yes, you are. We got a report. You fit the description. Your car fits the description. You're driving a light blue Chevy." And my friend Al pointed out, "That's a metallic blue Pontiac." This cop slapped him for correcting him.
Wow.
Well, what happened is, as this was going on, they wanted identification. Well, remember, I didn't have my driver's license. My heart's beating 1,000 miles a minute at this point because I'm thinking, okay, I'm really in trouble now. I don't have any identification. The only thing I had was my laminated student ID card. That was the only pictured ID I had. So I took that out, and I showed it to the cop who'd been screaming and spitting in my face and standing in front of me. I gave it to him.
Right.
Can I say what he said?
What did he say?
Well, he looked at it, and he said, "Oh, this has got to be bullshit because N-word, are too stupid to go to college," and threw it in the gutter.
Wow. And what year was this about?
73.
In Chicago.
Yeah. And I said, "Did you just call me the N-word?" Of course, I said the word.
Right.
He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, it takes one to know one."
Wow. Okay.
And he took out his service revolver, and he put it right in the center of my forehead. I remember I could see the bullets in the chamber. And I remember thinking, I'm going to die tonight on my 21st birthday. It was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had in my life. I mean,
you never told me this.
I was trying to do everything I could to not pass out.
I bet.
And, my 2 friends were looking, and they were just petrified.
I bet they were.
And then
What possessed you to say that?
I was angry.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean, I was scared, but I was also angry. I mean, he just called me that word.
Yeah, no, I get
understand something. My father always said that was the worst word in the English language. That is what I have grown up believing to this day.
Right.
I hate hearing it.
Yeah,
I hate hearing black people say it. That's one reason I don't like rap music.
And it's like, and it's it's
a disgusting word.
Totally, and it's glorified in. I mean, hip hop. I don't know if you've noticed, particularly with hip hop and rap. It's transformed into something that really kind of lost sight of its roots.
That's a whole nother story. Yeah. I have a real problem with all of that, but
go ahead.
Just as fast as all of this happened, they got a report that apparently they had cited or arrested the other guys, and as quickly as they came, they jumped into their cars and left us.
And of course, they apologized.
No.
They didn't?
No, they didn't say
that's
shit.
so interesting.
They didn't say a damn thing.
Surprising.
Isn't it shocking? No, we're sorry. You can go on your way. They didn't say anything. They just got in the cars and sped off.
So how would you give context to people who are not black to understand that probably wouldn't have happened to you unless you were black?
I don't know how you
can.
can, because the whole thing is, if you're not African American, or if you especially don't know any, or if you've never had any who've been honest with you about the experience,
Right.
you can't see it.
So, like, where would you? Well, let me put it to you this way: what would you lead people to, whether it be a film or articles or anything, or the 1619 Project or Critical Race?
It's like having a third. It's like having a third eye.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what could
And
give
you're going to
people a better
constantly be
understanding?
reminded that you have that third eye.
Right.
There's an eye in the middle of your forehead, and I don't have that eye, and I'm glad I don't have that eye, and it's too bad you do have that eye,
Right.
or I don't like you because you have that eye. It sets you apart. It makes you different. You were just talking about the editorials, okay? I wrote an editorial, the first one I wrote, I did, very ardently criticizing the African Americans who spoke at the Republican National Convention.
And why did you do that?
Because I don't have a lot of respect for them.
For who specifically?
Herschel Walker,
Okay.
Tim Scott. Okay. Don't even get me on Candace Owens. She didn't speak, but we have a word for them in the black community, for black folks like that. I don't want to say it, but I'll say this. It rhymes with mouse trigger. Okay? I mean, really.
Okay.
So, I mean, just...
Okay.
What was your question?
Well, like, you were saying you don't have respect for these people.
No, I don't. I don't have respect for these people because they're not being honest. Okay? They're not being honest about the black experience, and remember, I said not too long ago, for African Americans, this has been the Holocaust.
Well, that's what I was...
People will say, they'll come along and they'll say, this is the greatest country in the world. Well, yeah, for you.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at. Like, what could you direct people toward to get at least some substantial
The
understanding?
1619 Project.
Okay, and the reason why I asked is because, like, you brought up these people who are paraded, in front of the public and say, hey, this, America's pretty good and we're doing okay, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems to be, a proactive, very orchestrated whitewashing of the black experience.
It is. It is. I mean, it is. I mean, for these people at the Republican National Convention, for Tim Scott to say, oh, my mother was a cleaning woman and, now I'm a senator. I mean, hey. That's your experience. Great, wonderful, but that doesn't reflect the experience of most African Americans in this country.
Yeah.
And you know that. He knows that.
Yeah, and exactly.
I mean, someone could use me as an example. Well, you're a college professor. Yeah, okay. You know what? That does not reflect the experience of every African American. It doesn't even reflect all of my experience. So you're telling me that because I'm teaching at a major university, I've never actually had the kind of experience I just described to you?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
You can't escape that.
Exactly.
And
it's interesting how, I recently found out that Clarence Thomas, in his younger days, was into, the Black Power movement.
Sure was.
Which I was astounded.
He helped establish the Black Student Union at his undergrad university.
And he went through this radical transformation, which I don't totally understand.
He sold out. He found out it was easier and we'd get farther if he played the game. Mm-hmm. If he didn't, tell the truth, if he didn't face the truth. Clarence Thomas thinks he's in a club he's not really in. I want to make that very clear right now.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, he's deluding himself. And he's been deluded by people. All right? If he did one thing, if he ever stepped out and said, you know what? I've been wrong all these years. There is racism in this country. I've experienced it. African Americans experience it. They would be done with him in 2 seconds. Okay?
Yeah.
All right? He's being used. Candace Owens is being used. She's a fool. She's an idiot. All right? She's being used.
Yeah. I mean, she seems to change her opinions based on the situation.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
And that's what, you getting back to, you've got a lot of, the media landscape today, just getting back to that, you've got a lot of people who are influencers, for lack of a better phrase, not real journalists, or social commentators, for lack of a better phrase. And they see opportunity to get their name out there, which translates into money. Like, there's no two ways about it. And so we've got, these incentive structures that are really counter to having people really informed about what's really going on. So you get this very counterproductive interpretation of people's experience, like Candace Owens,
Right.
And like people, other people of this nature, where they see an opportunity to say things that are provocative, and they get clicks and eyeballs on their content, and it's really counterproductive to creating a better society. Can you speak to the incentive structures that you see?
Well, the incentive structure is, you can be rewarded. Look at how...
You see this on social media as well.
Exactly. Look at how Clarence Thomas has been rewarded. Look at how, if you play the game.
And could you talk about what is the game that you're referring to specifically? I understand.
The game is... It's not that bad being black, they've over exaggerated the experience. It's we're not bad people. We haven't done anything wrong.
Which is why we don't want it in our schools in Florida teaching critical race theory.
Exactly,
because we don't want to talk about.
We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to face it, and you're helping us do that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because you're one of them, and that you
Exactly.
can tell them that we're not so bad. That type of game.
And they'll believe you because you're one of them, except the fact of the matter is that we don't. We just think they're mouse triggers, okay? There's no way in hell that we believe them.
We're going to get
work.
banned from YouTube for sure.
This is not going to work. It's
Right.
just, I'm telling you right now, I can, the vast majority of African Americans hate Clarence Thomas. Okay? In fact, we don't even call him Clarence Thomas. We call him Uncle Thomas. All right? And, Candace Owens, Tim Scott, you didn't have a chance in hell of becoming president of the Republican Party. In the first place, most Republicans these days are too racist to vote for a black man, and black folks can't stand him. He's not going to get this is just the way it is.
But there are, it seems like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of black people that I've met, particularly in the church-going communities, which is pervasive throughout this country, definitely in Chicago. And my father, lived in those circles, walked in those circles a lot, having produced Jubilee Showcase, this gospel television show, that they're very socially conservative, but politically progressive.
Exactly.
So then you've got, remember,
the movement started in the churches. Martin Luther King was a preacher.
Totally. And so there are quite a few black people that I've gotten to know over the years that have conservative values, also somewhat politically, because they've been disenchanted with the Democratic Party, and for good reason. For a lot of good reason. I mean, a lot of people have said, the Democrats have been pimping black people for years.
That's
and
true.
Getting them to do what they did and not really looked after the what black people really need. And you talk about reparations, and I mean, they're like, whoa, what did you say? No, let's not talk about that. It's the obvious thing that needs to be talked about.
But we can't have reparations for Japanese Americans.
You see what I mean? Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean,
thoroughly
that should be fully on the table, in my humble opinion. Absolutely. 100%, but no Democratic candidate would ever talk about it, and Obama never talked about it.
What did you just say? But what did we just say? Yeah, the Democratic Party has been pimping black folks for years. But what other choice do we have, Republicans?
Because there's no other choice, it comes right back
we're back to being a two-party system.
Exactly.
Okay, if you vote third party, then what you're basically doing is helping a party that you probably don't want to win.
So then, I don't know how hip you are to what Andrew Yang is doing with his party, and I've been listening to his podcast. It's like he's cutting across. That's why I love to break through the mold of identity.
Right.
Republican, Democrat, religious, ethnicity, anything like that, and you really start actually creating a forum where people are really talking to each other, where there's some person's talking and the other person's listening, and then vice versa, as opposed to yelling at each other and nobody's really listening. Because the key to real communication and progress on any issue, in my humble opinion, is listening. And we don't do a lot of that. And when there's a forum for it, by God, I'm attracted to that. And that's why I listen to his podcast. And he has people from the conservative circles and progressive circles and everything in between, which is great. That's what we need. And our current political landscape, and particularly our media landscape, is doing everything to not have that.
No.
Because they're disincentivized to do that because of the money. And so that's what I'm seeing. I mean, I would imagine you would concur with this. And is there anything that you comes to mind in terms of our incentive structures, given how they are and or how they could be corrected, to provide for more independent journalism across the board?
Well, first of all, yeah, independent journalism would be great, except that it's difficult to get it out there.
And it's hard to make the dollars to justify
It's very hard
it.
to make the dollars, okay? I mean, journalism is at a state right now where, especially thanks to people like Sam Zell, it's become so
Didn't he buy
corporate.
the Tribune?
Yes, he did,
Yeah,
and ruined it.
Yeah, okay.
It's become so corporate, like so many other things. That's the problem with universities. They become big corporations, which is why we have places like Northwestern paying their coaches $5 million a year because their teams bring in so much money.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the students, I don't think, are getting paid.
Hey, let me tell you something. You wouldn't have Northwestern football or baseball or basketball if you didn't have a Northwestern. And you wouldn't have a Northwestern if you didn't have students, and you wouldn't have students if you didn't have teachers.
Right.
Okay? That's where it starts. I mean, they do, after all, call this higher education, all right? And these students are paying a hell of a lot of money to go to school there.
Yes.
So I've always looked at it
breathtaking.
is that every student in my class has just bought a brand new Jaguar. Because that's about how much money it costs to go there every year. Or if you're a graduate student, you're spending like $80,000. You're supposed to get your money's worth. I'm not supposed to waste your time or your money with my own projects.
Right.
Okay? And as you've said, I've done them, but I did not do that at the sacrifice of the students in the class. You know that project I just mentioned that we did in Hamburg? I did that while carrying a full class load. They didn't give me a quarter off to develop this. I did that while carrying a full class load.
Incredible.
Well, yeah, that's what you do when you're lower echelon faculty. You don't get, the little perks.
Right.
You don't get to, teach 1 or 2 or 3 classes a year while you work on your individual projects. That's not what it is.
You mentioned that you were lower echelon faculty.
That's anything below associate professor.
And why do you think that is?
Well, part of it's my own choice.
I
as
see.
I said, I chose to be a teacher rather than a professor.
I see.
And I think part of it is the problem that exists with higher education, which is that excellent teaching is not rewarded. You have to, if you're not bringing in research dollars, or if you're not bringing in attention through what you're researching or what you're publishing, if you're not bringing in those grant dollars, that's not considered to be service to the university. I mean, teaching the students who are paying a shitload of money to come to that school is not enough service to the university. So and everybody in academia knows this.
Right.
You can be the greatest teacher in the world, but that doesn't get you very far.
Exactly.
And you can be a horrible teacher, but if you're bringing in those grant dollars, they'll keep you forever. They'll tenure you.
So, I mean, you're disincentivized to do the very thing that actually empowers
That's exactly it. You're
students.
disincentivized to do the very thing that you're supposed to be doing. Teaching.
Yeah,
You are.
exactly. And
And
teaching.
that's a huge issue with me with higher education. It's been the most disillusioning thing I've discovered.
Yeah.
And as I said, part of this was my own fault. I've been aware of this for a very long time. But I made a decision that, all right, they hired me to teach journalism. That's what I'm going to do.
I mean, it kind of comes down to, well, what are you all about? And you say it's like your own fault, but it really actually isn't a fault from my standpoint. It really is something that actually is a beautiful thing where you made a conscious choice. you understood the paradigm and you said, well, I'm really a teacher. That's really what
Well,
I'm
when
here
I said
to
it was
do.
my own fault, that's the way they would put it.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have not made progress there, it's because you haven't done enough. It's
Right.
like, no, all I've been doing is dragging my ass in that classroom for the past 27 years and teaching the people that you've encouraged to come here because you've told them that they're going to get a first-rate education because they're paying for it.
Right.
That's what I did.
Right.
Okay?
Right. Exactly.
It takes, and I want to understand what this understood. I'm not putting down the teachers who do the research or who do the publishing. That's important.
Absolutely.
And it's important. You have to do a lot of work to work for a tenure. Okay? And I'm not putting that down at all. But it also takes a lot of work to teach a college class effectively.
Oh, God, yes.
You know this. And especially when you're doing 2 a quarter and 6 a year.
Yeah.
I mean, this is work. And half your work is not even in the classroom. It's what you have to do to prepare for it. I mean,
and then grading all the papers
thank you.
afterwards.
I have
and,
taught all day and then gone home and graded papers all night.
And the amount of energy it takes
Yes.
in the classroom.
Exactly.
Is
Exactly.
intense. A lot of people don't realize
they
that
do
because
not
you're
realize
you're
that.
engaged. Really, I mean, you have to be
Yeah.
effective.
I mean, let's say I have 16 students in my class and they write something. I've got to go through every line of every word they've written for 16 stories.
Right.
That takes time.
Yeah,
And I got to
absolutely.
comment on it. Okay? And then give it back to them.
And you
then
can't half-ass it.
No, you cannot have that. I mean, there are people who do.
Yeah.
They will just put, they'll read something wonderful. Okay? A. Or put at the top, terrible. F. And not tell them why. Okay? You need to go through and explain this is why this is working and this is why this isn't working.
Exactly.
It takes a lot of work.
And there's so much on the line if you really just, you zoom out just a little bit and you realize you're training future journalists that will report on critical things that people need to know
Exactly.
about at some future point
Exactly.
in some media outlet.
So let me make a point about where I think this disassociation comes when it comes to, is alive and thriving when it comes to higher academics. I've said that, yes, I'm not putting down the whole thing of research and publishing and tenure track. That's fine. But I'm saying that there should be another track, which is that you should be rewarded specifically and exclusively for doing an outstanding job of teaching.
Yes, absolutely.
I believe that.
Yes.
That is not something that should detract from your moving ahead. That is something that should encourage you to move ahead. That, excellent teaching should be rewarded.
Yes,
All right?
absolutely.
In the first place. And in the second place, I was going to make a second point, which I just lost. But that is a problem, I think, that exists, and it's not all universities, but it is to a very great extent with so-called research universities. Now, when I started teaching there, I think my first impression was I would teach there 3 or 4 years. It'd be on my resume. Oh, this guy taught at Medill. He's got his stuff together. I didn't expect to be there all this time. What, attracted me and kind of has kept me there all those years is meeting people like Jack Bridges and Jim Foley. And some of the other people that I've mentioned. These are outstanding people who come through that program. And it's just been such a pleasure to work with them.
Right,
And it's been a little bit addictive.
Yeah.
I guess that's the best thing to say.
Because it's wonderful to teach hungry students.
Yeah, it is.
That is
and as I've said, doubly wonderful to see what they do with that education when they leave.
totally, absolutely.
But, as far as the school is concerned, their attitude is, well, thank you very much. And then, okay, well, what else are you doing? Isn't this enough?
Yeah, exactly. Well, getting back to, I wanted to make sure I touched on this. If you had any thoughts on, given that we're doing a series on incentive structures, and one of the different strands of society that we're going to focus on is healthcare, agriculture and health, energy, the justice system, politics, and obviously the media and politics are closely intertwined. But if there was anything that comes to mind in terms of, altering the incentive structures to create better journalism and more responsible publication of reporting, is there anything that you can think of to foster better, more independent and enriching journalism, specifically with regard to our incentive structures? Because the for-profit model, is it a non-for-profit business model? I know Lions Publishing helps people create journalism businesses and foster entrepreneurship in the journalism landscape. Is that something?
Well, the for-profit model is kind of in trouble now anyway. There was a time when, there's always, in my estimation, and I've also heard this from people who have been in the profession a very long time, that there's kind of a distinction between the profit incentive and the public service aspect of it.
Exactly.
I mean, you got to make some money, because if you don't, you're not going to stay in business very long.
Exactly.
And the way newspapers used to do it is that they would sell ads. But now the internet takes care of that. So they have had to come up with a new model for paying their staff.
Well, and also, speaking of the internet, I know that a lot of outlets like Facebook, people can post, an article from a news outlet, but they're not paying for it, even though the content is being monetized in some way.
This is all. It's all strange to me to a certain extent. I'm still trying to understand it all, the business models, because I'd never worked on that aspect of it.
Right.
I've always been on the editorial part of it.
Right, exactly.
But you have to make up. You have to pay your staff somewhere or another. So one of the things that I've noticed, for instance, if let's say somebody posts something from the New York Times or the LA Times or Vanity Fair, and you attempt to look at it, and they're saying, no, if you're not paying for this, you can't look at it. I'm all for that. Okay? Because you can't give this stuff away.
Right.
That was a mistake that was made at the beginning.
Right.
That they're starting to correct.
Right.
I know it's annoying. You want to read this article.
Right.
But, if you're not going to pay for it, you don't get to read it. It's that simple.
Right.
Because people have to be paid for what they're doing. You got to pay your journalists. You got to pay your staff.
It's interesting. Ever since the digital distribution happened with music, with the creation of Napster, all of a sudden
streaming.
And now people think that they are owed to get content, music or journalism or whatever it is.
You are not owed free. When somebody, works hard to produce something, that costs money and time.
Yes.
And you are not owed that. If you want it, you need to pay for it.
Right.
What's going on right now in Hollywood? Pay your writers, pay your actors a livable wage.
Yeah.
Or you don't get a product. And I'm all for that.
And, it's one thing if a business is barely getting by, but the studios, the big ones in Hollywood.
They get over like fat rats in a cheese factory.
That's what I'm talking about. I mean, it's like, come on.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like
and their writers and a lot of their actors are barely making a livable wage. There's nothing. That to me is one of just the whole system that we're in right now. Why do we have a 1%? Okay? We got people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Okay? Making all this money, hand over fist. And so many people are struggling right now. There's no way that's the way it's supposed to be. You can't. There was a time when, a working class guy could buy a 3-bedroom house, and a car. You can't do that now unless both he and his wife or second half or she and her better half are working like dogs.
That's what I'm talking about. I mean, if you, just again.
You can't buy a house in Los Angeles now because it's so damn expensive. So you got people commuting, 100 miles to work. New York is so expensive that you can't live in Manhattan anymore. Okay? There must be, at least a dozen neighborhoods in Chicago that are gentrifying rapidly. I teach a class on that. I send students out to these neighborhoods that are gentrifying, and they learn all kinds of stuff. They learn about, how the Cook County Assessor's Office can tack thousands of dollars onto your property tax from one bill to the next. And if you don't come up with that money to pay it, you got to sell. You got to move. They learn about the labyrinth of trying to get your kid properly educated. That if you don't have the money to send your kid to private school, or the contacts to send your kid to or if your kid's not bright enough to test well into a magnet school or a charter school, then you have no choice but to send them to the neighborhood school, which might be lousy. What's the way to move from one economic circumstance higher up? Education. And it's not even accessible.
That's what I'm talking about. And so, like, if you look at a documentary that was done by Robert Reich, the former labor secretary under Clinton, Inequality for All, it shows that, from the late 70s, early 80s, when Reagan took over in the 80s, ever since Reagan, the gap between the haves and the have-nots has been growing steadily. But,
Morning in America,
and it's
baby.
not like, it's not like Clinton didn't try to reverse that. He repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, and it put the accountability of banks on or lack thereof on steroids. It was horrible.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is it's traditionally, at least,
and
as far as
Obama restored the economy, but as far as those bankers, they got away with it.
That's what I'm saying. It's like the middle class has been gutted, and the cozying up of the Democratic Party to corporate America is part of the issue.
Yeah.
So then you see this Republican Democratic machine, and people sometimes falsely equate the two. But yet, if you take a look, a wider lens to it, you're like, well, wait, they're kind of part of this system that doesn't allow a lot of real reform in. And, the level of like antitrust laws are not being utilized and not being executed and policed at all. Like you see Jeff Bezos. Amazon is just like a basic retail monopoly now.
Yeah. So where are we at this point? Okay, I'm getting ready to retire from Medill, right? From Northwestern. You think there's a pension? No, there's no pension.
Amazing.
Okay, no pension. After 27 years, or 28 years by the time I leave, there is no pension.
It's incredible.
It's not like, okay, well, you'll have a pension that will be based on your years of service, like, for instance, I don't know, 12 years, 50% of your salary, 20 years, 60% of your salary, 25 years. No, nothing like that. You have a 401. And if you haven't put enough money into it, sorry. But who in the hell can save enough money for that? Okay, I read recently that you're supposed to, if you want a comfortable retirement, okay, this is today, not even in the future. We're not even talking about your kids. All right, you need to put away somewhere between $300,000 to $500,000 if you want a comfortable retirement. Well, who can do that with as much as housing costs today, with as much as college tuitions cost today, with student loan debt? Okay, who's going to be able to save that amount of money? So the fact of the matter is that the majority of people have not saved enough to retirement. I'm in that. Okay. So yeah, once I leave, you know what? I'm going to be finding another job because I got to work. All right. I got to make an income because there's not going. Ironically enough, I taught for 10 years at a Prairie State College, part time. That was under the state system. They have a pension. But because I was part time, it's not that much of a pension. But the place where I've spent most of my time teaching, no pension. And you know why? One of the reasons why there are no longer pensions? Because Americans are living longer. And these companies, and let's face it, universities are now companies, do not want to pay somebody's pension for 10, 20, 30 years. So they got rid of them.
Right.
So almost no place has pensions these days, which means that when you get old and you've worked all your life and you want to say, now I'd like to kick back, you can't do it.
Right.
That's where we are.
And that's a real,
it's disgusting.
It's disgraceful.
Yes,
totally.
disgraceful.
Yeah.
Where we've got other people like Jeff Bezos. How much money does he have now?
And how much does he need?
How much does he need?
That's the thing. It's almost like, the greed is so absurd, but yet, most.
Well, didn't Michael Douglas say it in Wall Street? Greed is good.
At some point, people kind of lose sight of, what's important, it seems like, with all of this greed.
Should I have been greedy? You have to question yourself sometimes when after you've done something that you think was good. I have to tell you, when I was first, years ago, it's like another time now. When I found out that, I was going to teach at Northwestern, I was elated. I was going to teach at the best journalism school in the country. I was on cloud 9 for weeks before I taught my first class. And I compare that to the way I feel now after having been there all these years. And it's just like, you know, I mean, I know I did the job well.
Yeah, for sure.
But as for what it did for me, it's like, you know, I mean, just,
Right.
It's not like I feel this tremendous sense of accomplishment. And I should.
You definitely should. And that should be rewarded.
But that's to an extent because of the system that we live under now, where you can do something and do it well, and it just doesn't have the kind of, how can I put this? You don't get the kind of approbation for that you think you deserve.
Yeah, absolutely.
My satisfaction is intrinsic.
Yes.
And the satisfaction is, as I've said, why did I stay there so long? The students.
Yeah, absolutely.
And seeing what they're doing and feeling their gratitude. And I do feel it. They make sure I feel it. And I think the reason for that is because it's so rare. I mean, the student I just recently had dinner, lunch with, told me, she said, you know, I've had, you know, professors both in grad and undergrad who had no effect on me at all. You did.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You were exceptional in the classroom. And, you know, I think this was either prior to or just as you started working at Northwestern, one of the projects that you and I have a mutual friend, Raleigh Hudson.
Yeah.
Who you worked on the Promised Land. Was that before Northwestern or just
that was
toward the
before
beginning?
Northwestern?
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know you're just a committed journalist and storyteller. And that was something that you were really proud of.
Oh, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that
Sure.
project? That was with the BBC?
Yeah, BBC.
Yeah.
It was a 5-part series that examined the northward migration of African Americans and the political and social ramifications of that, specifically from Mississippi to Chicago. Because there's a direct
Staple
link
Singers
there.
were part of that.
Yes, they were.
Mavis talked about
Exactly.
that.
One of the things I found out of the many things, I mean, I found out a lot about my own people's history by working on that project. And one of the things that I found out is that where African Americans settled outside the South depended on the train lines. So as a result of that, African Americans in Chicago have a direct link, not all of them, but quite a few of them, to Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee.
Yep.
African Americans that's African Americans in Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, in the Midwest. African Americans on the East Coast, New York City, Boston, Philadelphia. They have a direct link to South and North Carolina, Florida, Georgia. African Americans who settled in Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, San Diego, Denver, have a direct link to Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana. And that's based on train lines, okay? My family's a little bit of an exception. My mother and father were born and raised in this area. My mother was from Chicago. My father was from Evanston. But their parents were actually from Georgia. And the reason that I know this for a fact, that my mother's family settled in Chicago is because they wanted to get the hell out of Georgia. And Chicago was as far as they could afford to get, as far away as they could afford to get. So that's why they came here in 2003. In 1903.
Oh, gotcha. Gotcha.
2003.
For a minute, I was like...
1903.
Gotcha. Okay.
My father's family ended up in Evanston about 1912.
And there's a street with your
Garnett
last name.
Place, which is named after my great uncle who was killed in World War I, the Battle of the Meuse-Argonne.
Okay.
When he was 25.
Incredible.
Thomas Garnett. But that's, it was revelatory for me as well.
I bet.
So the project was a 5-part series. The first episode examined why African Americans wanted to leave the South, because it was a horrible place to live.
And you were a researcher?
Yes, researcher.
Okay.
Which means that my job was it was a variety of things, but the biggest part of the job was to find the kind of people that they needed to interview for the project.
I see.
The producers would tell Raleigh and I what they were looking for.
Right.
They would give us a personality profile, and we'd go out and find these people. I interviewed, for instance, about 25 people. They took 3. Okay. And then the second part of the project examined how African Americans came, left the South by train, by bus. Some of them actually walked, out of the South.
That's incredible.
Yeah. The third was what it was to settle in a new place. The fourth, was about the political aspects after we'd been here for a while. And the last part of the series, now this was up to 1995, was how we were faring. So, for instance, the three people that I brought to the project, Vernon Jarrett, who was a significant African-American journalist here in Chicago. He's deceased now.
I remember him.
By the way, Valerie Jarrett, who was Barack Obama's administration, was his daughter-in-law.
Oh, okay. Got it. Uh-huh.
So the Jarretts are a pretty significant family in this, pretty prominent family in this area. He originated in Tennessee.
Okay.
And then there were two other people. One person whose family came from Mississippi who'd done very well in the hair care industry, cosmetology industry, had a lush, lovely home in the suburbs with a swimming pool.
Okay.
And then there was the opposite of that. Another woman whose family had immigrated from Mississippi, but they ended up in Robert Taylor. So actually the project I did with Jack Bridges was not the first time I'd been at Robert Taylor. So that was what the project was about. It was very well done by the BBC. It was aired on BBC and the Discovery Channel and also PBS, I think.
Oh, okay.
In the United States, and it was nominated for an Emmy.
And you thought the producers and directors from the BBC were good. They were, they wanted to tell this story authentically.
Yes, they were. They a little naive at times, but I understood that.
Sure,
they're
course.
not from the United States. They're from England, but they were dedicated to this project.
And why it's interesting how we have the BBC from the British Broadcasting Company that is documenting this part of the American experience.
Well,
why
who made 12 Years a Slave? Steve McQueen, who's a British producer and director. He's not an American.
I know.
Americans have a problem facing this.
That's what I'm talking about.
The best documentary I've ever seen about the civil rights movement was Eyes on the Prize, and that was done by a black documentarian. Okay? But no, I mean, what's the guy's name who did the Civil War? Ken Burns?
Okay.
Maybe he'll tackle at some point in time. They have a way of, other people outside this nation can look at the United States and say, yeah, you got a troubled past. And we can tell it.
But it's interesting that you've got this company from, the UK who has a troubled past as well.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
I think they got into colonization and stuff back in the day. It
had a little something to do with the slave trade.
Yeah, but it's always interesting how, like I've worked with, crews from the BBC on other projects, and so I find it very interesting that they do this. And also I've noticed there's a lot of really, really good British actors that can pass off as American,
and we can't do the reverse.
Extremely well.
Yeah,
like I don't know if I pronounce his name, but I think it's Chiwetel Ejiofor, who was in 12 Years a Slave.
Yes,
he was also in Talk to Me. Where he played
Idris Elba.
And I thought he was American, and then
I thought Stringer Bell, the guy who played Stringer Bell in The Wire, was American. I'm talking about Idris Elba.
Oh, whoa, okay. Yeah, and what about the guy? I can't think of his name. Who played Fred Hampton?
God! Oh my God!
Who was outstanding?
I can't think of the guys. Daniel. He was in.
It's not Daniel Kaluuya, is it?
Yes.
Is
Daniel
that his
Kaluuya.
name? Yeah, Kaluuya. I think.
Kaluuya.
Outstanding as Fred Hampton.
God, I love that movie.
And they did.
Oh my God, I love that
A
movie.
very, very good job with it.
Was the director? No, the director is Black American.
Oh, okay.
The person who did that.
Well, what was interesting about? we did. I
remember that era.
Well, we did. I bet you did, because we interviewed his attorney, Fred Hampton's attorney, on this program. It's episode 9. Fred Hampton's attorney Flint Taylor, and we talked about the film versus reality, and I think Lakeith Stanfield, who played the guy
Yes.
he portrayed the actual person who betrayed Fred Hampton. Unfortunately,
The actual person.
the actual person versus Lakeith Stanfield's portrayal. To the attorney that we interviewed, Flint Taylor, he said Lakeith did an exceptional job. But so did Daniel Kaluuya. He said, but it's still, even though he gave an incredible performance versus the real man, Fred Hampton was still on this level that was extraordinary. He was an extraordinary leader.
Fred Hampton was a hurricane of influence and
intellect.
To be
and
so young.
courage.
He was 21 years old.
I know.
When he died.
And the
And
way
I want to make this very clear. His death was murder.
oh, totally.
Okay?
Oh, yeah.
They counted 99 shots and exactly from the police and exactly one that came from inside that apartment.
Right.
And that was more than likely from Mark Clark as he was hitting the floor.
Yeah. Oh, so you're familiar with this story? Even
I
before.
remember December 4th, 1969. I'll never forget
Okay,
it. I was
got
in
it.
high school.
Yeah.
It had a tremendous effect on me and so many other kids because Fred Hampton this is a man that was actually pulling together a coalition of African Americans, Hispanics, and poor whites.
Poor whites who sometimes some of them flew the Confederate flag.
Yes, exactly.
They
He
weren't-
had that kind of influence.
He
What
was
did
amazing.
Was say to these people, we're all in the same boat.
Totally.
And we're not your enemy. They are.
oh, exactly.
The people, the power structure that we were just talking about,
Totally.
expressing you. That's why they
Exactly.
killed him. He was dangerous as hell.
Yeah. Yeah, well, what, most people don't know that we explored in that episode, which was, COINTELPRO. And there was a government program to deal with this, the Black Messiah problem.
Yeah, there was a government program to destroy the Black Panthers, which they did.
Oh, totally.
Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember that era. My parents wouldn't let me become a Black Panther. Remember, I was only 16.
Oh,
that
you
time.
wanted to be a Black Panther?
I don't know if I really wanted to, but I really admired them. Mm-hmm. And so did my parents, frankly, but they just didn't want me to get killed.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And they could kind of see what was going to come down. In
Right.
fact, when Fred Hampton was murdered, I remember my mother crying, because this was someone who was younger than her oldest son. And I remember my father saying, that's what we didn't want to happen to you.
Exactly.
Because I used to go to protests and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And would I have become a Black Panther? I don't know. I mean, I was kind of a sheltered kid. And,
Right.
I was just coming out of my goofy stage, where I was a goofy, flat-footed, very naive kid, raised in a middle-class neighborhood, wasn't really familiar with a lot of the stuff that African Americans who were in poor communities were dealing with. I credit my mother and father for that. They sheltered us. When you are this is one thing I have to say, that when you're from a loving family, there is an effort among African American families to shield their kids sometimes from the harsh realities as much as possible. They can't do it entirely. There's no way they can do it.
Yeah, totally.
But they try to at least lessen it to a very great extent. And that's what my parents were doing. So no, they did not want me to become a Black Panther because they didn't want me to die.
Right.
But it wasn't that they didn't see very clearly, what was going on. My dad, in particular, never, ever was one of these African Americans who tried to. He was not a Tim Scott by any stretch of the imagination. He just wasn't that kind of person. And neither was my mother. They knew the reality of it. I remember when I was 6 years old and we moved out to the neighborhood we were going to, I was going into a school that I like to say was temporarily integrated because it took several years for all the whites to leave.
Right.
And when I went into the school, let's say first grade, most of my classmates were little white kids. And my parents told me the story later. One day, I was sitting at the breakfast table or the dinner table as a 6-year-old. And I just casually said, I heard that there were N-words at the school. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And that's when my mother and father decided we have to have the talk.
Right.
Now, do you know what the talk is? The talk is when you sit your kid down and explain that there's race prejudice and they have to deal with it.
Right.
Okay. I didn't mean to use the word. I think the last time I tried to, I just forgot.
Sure.
So they had to deal with it.
Right.
Well, what had happened is that I'd heard the word on the playground, and a little white kid had told me. He didn't know what the word meant. He was telling me as a warning that these bad people are out here without actually knowing who those bad people were, that I was supposed to be one of them. Okay?
Kids are so...
Exactly. They're so innocent.
Exactly.
And I didn't know what that word was because remember what I said. My dad said that he considered that to be the worst word in the English language. That was always the way he described it. So that word was never used in our house. I didn't know what it was. So they had
How
to sit,
old were you at this
6.
time? Wow.
So they had to sit down and explain to me what that word was about. And I started crying.
Wow.
And they said, you have to understand, people who use that word are ignorant. They're stupid. It doesn't really apply to you. It's what they think it applies to you. And it's a bad word, but it doesn't, people who use it are the bad people, not you.
Right.
Okay? And that had to be explained to me.
Right.
So that's when you kind of find out at a very young age, okay, what being black in America is. That's how I found out. When that word was used, and they had to explain to me what that word meant. So, I mean, we get this education very early on. And if you've got conscientious, this is why I have a problem with the word. I'm surprised I said it, but I hate that word.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons I have a problem with hip hop and rap, because it's just, some people, black folks use that word like punctuation.
Exactly.
Okay. And it has, it's like acid in my ears.
Yeah, I bet.
Okay. I don't care who uses it. It's acid in my ears to hear it.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in a household where that word was considered to be thoroughly and utterly disgusting. Okay.
Yeah, it's got an electricity to it, and boy,
and I don't think there's a way of desensitizing it, because it's been explained. Well, the reason why they use it so much is they're desensitizing it. No, it's got too much history behind it.
Yeah, no, I hear
When
you.
I was watching 12 Years of Slavery, you might have noticed this too. The slaves referred to themselves with that word because they were taught to.
Right.
And the reason that they were taught to is because that word is dehumanizing.
Exactly.
And they were taught to dehumanize themselves. Now, here we are, a century and a half later. I think the greatest destruction that has been done to African Americans through racism is it has convinced so many African Americans to devalue their own lives. That's one reason why there's so much carnage in these communities. These kids don't respect their own lives. Why should they respect yours?
The culture is...
The culture has,
been, it's been orchestrated to a large degree, more than we realize from behind the scenes.
Yes. Okay. You're nothing.
We
You're nothing.
know of the CIA orchestrating drug use.
You are nothing. You are trash. And, referring to yourself by this word is emphasizing that.
And, it's
I am
interesting.
nothing but an N-word.
And it's tough to, to wrap your head around it when, one of the most brilliant comedians, Dave Chappelle, who's lauded in almost every circle you go into, uses the word regularly.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of mixed emotions wrapped up in that,
Well,
no matter what color you are, but particularly if you're black.
Richard Pryor was the one who actually started using it. Okay, and later regretted it.
Oh, really?
You can actually, yes, he did.
Interesting.
Yeah, he later regretted it. He said, "I'm sorry I did that."
And I think Richard Pryor is one of Dave Chappelle's idols.
Exactly.
It's interesting.
Exactly.
It's interesting.
He had an album called "That N-Word Is Crazy." Okay?
Wow. Yeah.
Which was extremely popular. It sold millions. But yeah, he later said that he regretted it.
And it's interesting because you have Dave Chappelle, who did some of the most brilliant comedy sketches I've ever seen, like the black white supremacist or the race auction, where they're auctioning off Eminem, and I'm like, the things the subject matters that he has gone right after that are just the most sensitive in our society, that, I mean, he's gone right and like danced around them and turned them on its head and like showcased them for people to see in some of the most brilliant ways, yet he's using this. So that's a conversation that'll be ongoing. But I wanted to wrap up with saying to you, thank you so much for this. This has been incredible. But also, it must be very freeing to you, wrapping up your career as a teacher at Northwestern, now publishing your opinion pieces on, what is the website again?
MaxNewsToday.
MaxNewsToday.com. That must be very freeing for you to really express yourself, because I don't think you've ever really done this during your tenure at Northwestern.
I've never been an editorialist ever.
Okay.
Throughout my entire career. My whole thing was reporting what other people thought. Who gave a damn what I thought? I was the conduit.
Right.
Okay. And by the way, I want to mention this.
Please.
The person who established that Max News Today, the person who established that website, is a former student.
Oh.
Yeah, Nathan Max.
Oh, great.
Yeah, he's a former student. He got in touch with me about 3 years ago during the height of the pandemic.
Okay.
And said he was establishing this, and said, and offered me this chance to write editorials. And it's like, the first thing I said was, man, I don't write editorials. That's not my thing. I don't do that.
And then?
And he said, I think you'll be good. I got to give him credit. He saw something I didn't see. He said, I think
which
you'll
is
be
what
good
a
at
great
this.
teacher does. You see something in
Exactly.
so it's kind of reverted. I learn a lot from my former students when we talk.
Same thing.
Yeah.
You learn from them.
Yes.
And he said, no, I think you'll be great at this. So I took a shot at it. And I haven't written that many. I mean, I've won a couple of awards for it.
Right.
But you can't, they're from non-daily reporting. Because, I mean, I write them when I move to write them. I mean, I don't think I could write. One of the reasons I didn't want to write editorials, I didn't want to be under the pressure of writing them every day or every week, because I don't always have an opinion.
And, I just had to say something that you really just brought to mind that I didn't want to, end this without bringing up, is that, when it comes to, some people feel a need to get different viewpoints. And I'm like, well, if it's something worthwhile, like, I challenge myself to listen to perspectives that I may not agree with. If I'm listening to something that could potentially provide some beneficial perspective to me. So, for instance, I'm not really going to turn on Fox News and listen to a lot of what's going on. Like, when Bill O'Reilly was on, I'm like, that's not helping me understand. But if I listen to, say, I learn about, say, Bitcoin, or I learn about some other perspective, say that this woman, who used the Honestly podcast, Barry Weiss, who used to work for the New York Times, and some of the people on her show come from a more conservative standpoint. Not totally, but like I've learned from their perspectives, and I challenge myself not to get triggered like I used to. And like, okay, now I understand that. Let me consider it for real. I want more of that. I think we need more of that. I think podcasting is a route to that, so that people are actually hearing each other. It's because what I realize is there's a lot more common ground than meets the eye. And I hope with this particular internet site that allows for opinion pieces, I hope he's trying to get opinion pieces across the spectrum of ideas. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to, this is progressive, this is conservative, this is... And
are you talking about Max News Today?
Yeah, or and any other outlet. Well, I think opinions are fine, but I just think that it gives people different perspectives, so that it's actually helpful for people to understand the variety of perspectives out there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think he actually is doing that.
Oh, that's great.
They pretty much lean left, but I think he is trying to do that. I mean,
it's harder. It's easier said than done.
It is easier said
because it's so hard to like look at yourself and say, and challenge yourself and say, am I not allowing this to be said? Like you can say any, like these trigger words and people will get triggered. Like I used to love,
woke, for instance, is now a trigger word. Okay.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. It's like,
it's
what
a
is
trigger
that?
word.
It started out as like just kind of being aware and or
having
politically
an open
correct
mind.
or PC. Like, oh, you're just kind of being considerate about other people that you may not know about. Oh, you're PC, or you're trying to be so perfect and trying to be so liberal and now woke. And it started out as. Actually, it started out as something that seemed like a good idea. Like you're kind of waking up to things that you didn't know about before.
Yeah.
That seems like a nice idea.
Or as someone
it
told me recently, you're not a college educator, you're an indoctrinator. Because now going to college, as far as this person is concerned, is not about expanding your mind. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's supposed to be about. They do call it higher education. Now it's about being indoctrinated to think left.
And you know what? and it's like, okay, like, is there indoctrination in schools? Of course there is. No question about it. But can we find a balance? Can we bring in that viewpoint and the other viewpoint that, okay, maybe to some degree that may be true, but also that you're expanding your mind and considering other perspectives, and that actually they can live together and a person can grow from that? That's all I'm saying. It's so nuanced that all I want is to have more nuanced conversations. That's it. And if you try to have them, you are blasted from different viewpoints and perspectives in the media, on social media, to a large degree. And if you really want to try to deal with the nuance from different perspectives, you're vilified. And these terms are vilified. They're turned upside down. And yes, like, we could sit here all day about talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. It started out as something that like seemed like a good idea. The organization transformed and did things that weren't really wonderful, but as a movement, it started out as a result of, people need to understand that Black Lives Matter. It's really simple.
Not more or only, but also.
And then like white lives matter, and then this, and then
blue lives matter.
And then it's like, come on. Really? Yeah. And it all I'm saying is the media landscape is so destructive to just fostering understanding from different groups of people. That's really what I'm pointing to, and that's the point of this series that we want to do. And so that it's, and I'm willing to take it on the chin. I understand that. And when you make an editorial now, you've got to be willing to take it on the chin. Like this is how I see it. And that's coming from your perspective, and that's fine. My perspective is that I'm going to talk to people from different perspectives, and I'm sure I'm going to take it on the chin from people that may not like what other people have to say, and that's okay.
Yeah, I've taken it on the chin.
Yeah, but you've got to be willing. What a lot of people don't realize is you've got to be willing to do that.
Well, I think so.
And that's what like a really good journalist who's reporting some investigatory piece has to be able to do that. I mean, people who really want to provide something worthwhile in the public arena, they've got to be willing to take it on the chin and have a thick skin. There's no two ways about it. If you're really going to put out something that could potentially be productive and constructive, people will try to turn it upside down and misconstrue it purposefully and make you and vilify you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's happened. To an extent.
So I mean, you can take any Elon Musk, for example, perfect example of somebody who's gotten, is lauded in some circles and vilified in others and all that. And it's like, maybe it's a mixed bag. For instance, is he bad on unions and creating a bad workplace? Potentially. I've heard some really bad things that are very, very concerning, for real. And that may be true. On the other hand, I saw him on an interview and he's like, well, people try to turn me as a conservative, but, I've done a lot of things for the environment because I actually do care about the earth. And he talked about his EV things and his renewable energy efforts, which are profound and significant. And he's very, very incredibly productive and intelligent in those arenas. And he's done some wonderful things that a lot of people think is great. So it's like, all I'm saying is, most people and most situations are mixed bags. It's not like we need to hate, and and our media is ginning people up to like, we need to hate this person and everything they say is hateful and everything that is bad and it's all bad and anything that they say is horrible. That's a terrible way to move forward in our society. I mean, so like, I'm Jewish. You mentioned Louis Farrakhan's name. Oh my God. And I was like, I had to say, well, I went to a Louis Farrakhan speech at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I didn't hear one word that was anti-Semitic. And they're like, oh, but he isn't, da-da-da-da. All my Jewish friends told me this. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Okay. Well, I listened to 3 more full speeches that he gave on television in their entirety and not out of context. I still didn't hear anything. Now, that doesn't mean he's not has bad sentiments toward Jewish people. I just haven't heard it from his mouth. So, and I would say to anybody who said this to me, if you hear something specific that he said in context, let me know.
Well, that's only fair.
And that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. And then the more I learned about why he's saying things in a particular way, how he's saying, I'm like, seems very rational and insightful. That doesn't mean I'm like this big proponent of the Nation of Islam and Louis Farrakhan. It's just that what I've experienced so far, I cannot disagree with. That's all I'm saying. And so, like, even what I'm saying right now could easily be taken out of context.
Oh, yeah.
Just putting it out in the public
arena. Are
you
kidding? You're Jewish.
He's a self-hating Jew. He's this, he's that,
Exactly.
and da-da-da-da. I mean, I remember when I brought up, Noam Chomsky's name to a fellow Jewish person, the first word out of their mouth is, oh, he's a self-hating Jew. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Noam Chomsky, who's criticized Israeli policies? I'm like, really?
Well, there are
Noam
people who are
Chomsky?
going to disagree with me about what I said about Tim Scott, for instance. They'll say that he's reasonable. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
And if somebody like brings up points that says, okay, this is what I think, I was like, well, tell me why you think that.
Yeah.
I'll listen. All I'm saying is what I've noticed is particularly over the last 10 years, mainly in the last 5 to 7, is I've noticed I'm a lot less triggered by things because I noticed that doesn't really help me understand the world at all.
It doesn't help anybody understand.
And it's so easy. Like the thing that's really helped me is like noticing that, I'm a human being and I have frailties like everybody else and I can get triggered. Just notice your triggers. It may help you actually not get run by them and actually hear another
Well, that's the
human
important
being.
thing, to not let them control you. And it's not easy.
And we're all
Yeah.
subject to it, no matter how astute or woke or politically correct or whatever ridiculous term you want to use that started out as a good thing but now has been vilified or whatever. If you try to remember that, I think that'll be helpful. And that's what actually got me into doing this show and got me into now thinking about doing this incentive series where I really want people I really want to create a forum where people can actually speak in a nuanced way and actually generate, authentic understanding. I know that sounds idealistic and ridiculous, but I think it's actually
it does
possible.
Not sound ridiculous.
It
does sound idealistic, but it's not ridiculous.
I mean, and I think it's possible if there's a form to do it and such.
Yeah.
So, like you may, and some of my other friends may see some podcasts are the titles for some of these series and say, what is he doing? But then when you listen to it, you may have a different opinion. And that's all I'm saying. So I think we need more of that. And, talking to you has hopefully enriched some other people's lives that might see this and who are not familiar with journalism, who've shut themselves off to journalism, and how can they find real good sources of journalism. And how can they understand the Black experience and a combination thereof that might be very helpful to people who might see this and say, wow, I had no idea.
Can I answer two questions right there?
Please.
One, how do you find out the truth about the Black experience? Talk to someone who's Black, first of all.
Beautiful.
Okay? I mean, actually go to the source and have a reasonable conversation,
Mm-hmm.
be honest about it, and tell them, I really want to know.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Because you got to create an environment for people to be honest
Exactly.
with you.
And you have to let people know that I'm doing this for a legitimate, honest reason. It's not just because I want to thrill, okay?
Exactly.
How do you find, good journalism out there? Oh, it's out there, okay? So how do you find it?
Yes.
Go to a journalist you trust and ask. They'll tell you, okay? It's there. I'll tell you right now. If you want to know where to find it, okay? It's what some people are calling fake news, but, I'll tell you right now, as from the perspective of a journalist. What newspaper should you read? New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, okay? Cleveland Plain Dealer.
And I just want to throw one thing in that people should know, that no matter what outlet that you listen to or read or whatever, has there been some issues with any organization that's run by human beings, no matter how great they've been? Yeah. Have there been some journalists from the New York Times that have done things that are sketchy?
Yes.
Yeah, but not very many.
No.
And have they broken some real vital
Post, too,
stories that we
exactly.
need to know about? Across the board for years and years in the Washington Post? Yeah, they have. So all I'm saying is, if you want to take one little example from an organization that has an incredible history of doing great work and say, that's why they're bad, I can't read them, that's not really the best way to proceed.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that because I have a tremendous amount of respect for the New York Times and the Washington Post and other media organizations that I've turned to generate an understanding. But, LA Times has done some great work.
They have.
Yeah, and the Atlantic.
Yeah.
But are there some things that have been, a black mark on their history, so to speak, and that's a horrible term to use, or let me say that again, that have been a detrimental mark on their history? Look at how the word has been utilized.
Well, you have black marks and you have
blackballed and black,
Let me say this also.
But you just don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I see that people are just primed to do that. See, that's what they said, and it's all bad. And you're like, no.
Everybody makes mistakes.
Exactly.
And you try very hard not to make them.
Exactly.
Right? So what you do is you accept that, but you look at the track record overall of what has been reported and how it has been reported.
Exactly.
And that's how you determine whether or not this is where you're going to get your most accurate information. So I stand behind those publications I just mentioned.
Yes.
And also, for me, that's what you do read. What do you not read? National Enquirer. Okay?
That's what I'm talking about.
As far as, media is concerned, let's say television. Where is, in my estimation, the most unbiased reporting right now? Well, it's been around for years. How about your NBC network news broadcast at 5:30? Or CBS. That's just the news. It's not MSNBC. It's not CNN. It's not opinion. It's correspondence telling you what happened. Okay?
Yeah.
Where do you not get news, general news? Fox News, because haven't they just been sued, okay, by a major company
openly
for lying? Yeah. Okay? Shouldn't that tell you that's not where you're going to get your real news?
And the fair use law that, Reagan pulled that way back.
Exactly.
And now we've got people.
This isn't that difficult to figure out, okay?
Well, for you.
Well, I guess not,
For
because I'm a
someone who's
journalist.
seasoned. I'm talking about for the mainstream audience that's not tapped in. We're coming from different perspectives for sure than, the mainstream.
Well, part of the problem is that audience has so many choices now. And
that's exactly.
Sometimes that's not a good thing. Okay?
And social media has amplified how bad that is, because then you can.
It's one reason I hold social media at arm's length.
Totally.
I do.
Because you get in that echo chamber and that bubble, and then it justifies.
Like what's going on with Twitter right now? I've never tweeted anything in my life. I have 300 followers who are still waiting for me to tweet.
Yeah,
something.
and it's a fine line, this whole debate between freedom of speech, and it's part is that's a really good thing, but what if someone's dangerous, and how do we ride that line?
Some people do not understand the difference between freedom of speech and hate speech. Okay?
And it's that's a whole nother. Yeah. That's a whole nother episode.
You might be.
That's a whole conversation in and of itself.
Yeah.
And it's
freedom of speech is, I have an opinion that might not be the same as yours, and it might even make you angry.
And but
hate speech is kill that person.
We're being in Skokie. The Nazis were defended by lawyers at the ACLU who were Jewish to let them speak. And like, that's hate speech for sure. But yet they believed in the freedom of speech. But now you've got like, people were not wanting Trump's Twitter account to be reinstated. And, part of, someone's thinking is like, yeah, because it's dangerous. But then on the other hand, well, where do we draw the line? And that's a whole nuanced conversation, which should be had for sure, but in a forum that's helpful for people to really work through it, to help them come to their own conclusions in a helpful and productive way. And that's really what I'm saying. And I got to tell you, it's been a real, real honor and privilege to teach with you, to have you here, for you to express your opinions, unfiltered, raw and uncut. And his name is pronounced Stephan Garnett.
Thank you.
Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You did.
Stephan Garnett.
You
but
did.
I do call him Steve.
Yep.
And he calls me Steve.
Yep.
And it was a real pleasure to have you.
Well, it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for tuning into the show. If you enjoy this podcast, make sure to subscribe to hear more compelling shows on Rhythm of Life and keep an eye out for our upcoming series of how we as a society oftentimes incentivize all the wrong behavior here in the United States. We see this in the healthcare industry, in the media, and in our educational systems, to name a few of the fields we will be covering. If you have a moment, please leave a rating and review so more people can hear about us, and share about Rhythm of Life on social media, and like us on Facebook. Thanks for listening. I'm Steve Ordower.
This has been a Rhythm and Light production.